What did I teach you?
You are Duke of New York. You're a number one.
I can't hear you.
You are the Duke of New York. You're a number one.
Peace. Can everybody hear me? If so, type it into the chat. Great. Excellent. Hope everybody's well, inshallah. Peace. Anybody have any questions about anything before we get started? What do you think about the depiction of the St. Louis Moors in BMF? It was horrible. You know what I mean? They tried to throw in a little distinction in like right before they got into the meat of how horrible they were. You try to make a distinction like the Moorish Temple is this, but then these people is really on this. So that was whack. And then like the scene where like they was talking with the guns and they had the prophet's picture behind them, and then they had like the gun set up, but it was like a gun pointing at the picture. Yeah, they're probably gonna have to get sued for defamation or something. And it seemed it didn't seem as malicious as I initially thought, but just the very act of the whole thing, like of all of the groups, you know what I mean? You get the most obscure Moorish group that's on that type of steez, you know what I mean? So it was definitely like a hit piece. So that was crazy. The one crazy part was when they first came to the Moor's crib, and then they shot the Moor, and then he fell, and then they started shooting, and he popped up and started shooting again. That was crazy. But you know, it's all part of the long-term smear campaign. Lenny says, how did the Muscovite Russian connections affect pre-colonial California Khalifa land? That's very good. Bring that up. The acquisition of Hawaii, or what became Hawaii, or the Kingdom of Hawaii, or the ability for them to get to the territory of Hawaii, came at the cost of paying Russia for the convenience. But that was really a justification, treaty-based payment based on something that happened earlier. And that was, they bought it for like 17 million. So nowadays that'd probably be like 71 billion. But back then they took the money because Russia was the one who blockaded a lot of the ships in Charleston during the so-called Civil War. They don't talk about that though. They don't talk about Russia's involvement in the Civil War, just like they don't talk about Germany or the Hessian involvement and the Swedish involvement in the formation of the Continental Congress and how those old Shechem sheiks and Holy Roman emperors was getting together to get money, and eventually led to the Continental Congress forming. But essentially, they had already owed them $17 million from that. So because they didn't pay them after the war, they was threatening basically to release the annexation rights that they had with the kingdoms and at Hawaii, at Alaska, at Khalifa, um, and let them rock. So instead, they couldn't afford that because then all of these would go back to being independent states or city states. You know what I'm saying? So they couldn't afford that. And remember, they didn't get to California until like 1846 because of how the straits and everything had been blockaded there due to the fortifications that had been set up by the old caliphate or Khalifian governments and nation states that was out there. So they really didn't have any real way into that, you know what I mean, until way later than they give credit to. So essentially, the Muscovites Confederation, they basically decided to go back to Tartary and fortify themselves there. But see, when when the Six Nations invaded Russia, which at the time was basically absorbing independent Tartary, because Khalifa and all of that was technically a part of independent Tartary, so they didn't really have any jurisdiction over them. Whereas what we would call Greater Tartary, right, and then Russo Tartary, the Russos were the ones, the Redskins were the ones who took over all of that. So in taking all of that over, they absorbed most of those kingdoms, except the last one to hold out was a kingdom called the Pugachev. So by the time they came over here, using the Siberians as dogs of war and the fighting and stuff, they entered into an armistice with those nation states here, and then acted as brokers between them and, well, us per se, the ones that was indigenous here, right? Where they would play the middleman between us and the other European powers. You know what I'm saying? That's why, because remember, Russia really didn't deal with slavery like that. The slaves that Russia had was the old Siberian, Khazarian, German, Caucasoid peasants that they had consistently had since they was pulling them out the ground in the 1800s. So they didn't really count because they technically were the slave class itself. You understand? So they didn't really count as that. So because they were always used in situations like that, by the time they started merging them with the Siberians and bringing them over here to help them fight the wars against those of us that was here, in terms of the Six Nation being Russian, now a confederated Russian state with the help of the figure they call Napoleon, and they provided aid to the United States by blockading the ships so that way the other Barbary ones couldn't get in and give supplies during the Revolutionary War. So, the Civil War. So, that's how they had to pay them back. So they decided to just use that as a means to make that happen. So also that way they wouldn't lose so much grasp. And because they was going along with the decoy, we're gonna rule through these fake people. They allowed them anonymity to move around the general populace and create and get them to become part of the different orders and stuff that they were going to use to help eventually overthrow the state that was established by Kamahena and them. What's Hogwarts? Just white Brit version of the moral schools at Toledo and Salamanca? Yes, all of those are just Professor Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, Hogwarts. All of that is like the stuff the Moors was going through, and teaching them all of that. So yeah, so that's going on. Somebody asked, "What about Brother Umar?" I mean, he. All I know is he went over to Africa, was saying how the Cherokees and these people was enslaving black people, and that's a conflated, open, statement without giving any real context as to what was happening. Because he's trying to make it seem like Siberian people was out here enslaving black people in mass and all of that, and that's the farthest thing from the truth. And to use Cherokee, whenever you use Cherokee, you gotta go. Are you talking about the Cherokees before 1846? Because then you're not talking about Cherokees, you're talking about Ananuia, Tasalagi, Choctolagi, you know what I'm saying? Ananuia, you know what I mean? That's what you're talking about when you say that. So all I know is he went over there talking all of that, and as soon as he got back here, downplaying us, saying how whack, Black Americans are for not being Pan-Africans, he get hit with the UWAP. So, that's on him, man. We can't really call it, because what he be talking about really has nothing to do with us. You know what I'm saying? He's just another facilitator of people who, like the people who run the SFS, who feel that because they're Africans and they're white people, that they can work with each other to keep to keep our economic money and influence and cultural influence flowing to them. I just saw a clip where it just talked about how this white man was saying, yeah, and CEOs, they rather hire they hire Africans at a greater rate more than so-called African Americans because they don't want to empower them, and they know that the Africans will work with them. You see what I'm saying? To keep the status quo as it is, to make keep us thinking that we're somehow inferior and that we're somehow mixed and all of these things that they keep shoving down our throats. But we the only ones they do that to. They don't do that to none of the Ethiopians. They don't do that to nobody else that is not from mainstream Africa. They only do that to us. So that lets you know what I mean? There's a discerning effort. There's a concentrated effort to keep us misidentifying ourselves. And so we have to ask, well, that's solely our problem. You know what I mean? With all the other problems we have to deal with. But, it is what it is. Let them say what they're going to say. Anybody has anything else before we get into this? Yes. The Kingdom of Morocco is giving Burkina Faso access to ports and all of the help and stuff that they need. And they are acting the same way that the Russians were acting with you know what I'm saying? With the Kingdom of Hawaii. It's the same system just nowadays. They running the same interference with them while they get their stuff together. And like I said, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, they're gonna be the real when they talk about Africa, they're gonna really be talking about them. Everybody else at this point seem like they just down with what they want to do. And that's cool. It's just that you can't try to flip that on us. So another clip the other day is some African lady was talking about how they're gonna wage the Africans and the Caribbeans is gonna wage war on the so-called Black Americans because we think we all that and we 64% of the people in America is immigrants and they're the ones that make all of this bullshit. All of this shit. And I'm sitting there looking at it, I'm like, so if it's really like that, then how come y'all don't you saying all of this in a 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom apartment, you know what I mean, in the bottom of Brooklyn or the bottom of whatever urban area you in right now. You know what I'm saying? And, but you're not in your country doing it. Y'all not in your own country doing none of this stuff. And that's all I be saying. All I'm saying is stop hating and get your own stuff together with your own country. Like, why are you talking all of this shit about us in our own country? And y'all got your own country and y'all don't want to do nothing about it. Y'all don't want to, you know what I'm saying? Y'all want to be here and wave flags. Meanwhile, you letting the Chinese, the Arabs, the white people just run through them places and y'all just show pride on Labor Day. Like that's what it is. Because that's what it is. That's what I'm seeing. You know what I'm saying? So you can't. So there is no anti melanated like we or I in particular don't like African or Caribbean people. Like that's crazy. You crazy. Like you understand? I don't even want to get in because then I wind up sounding like one of these white people. I got mad, but you call it friends and all of that. I ain't gonna get into my eldest son's ethnicity and all of that and Escamite and all that. Like believe it, y'all niggas want to believe, man. But all I know is we not trying to be like nobody else. As messed up and as beat up and as whatever it is that we are. One thing we not striving to be is what somebody else is. Even those of us that think they gotta copy that. Because in the end, it's a hustle. Like in New York, when they Jay-Z and Puffy and them shut down New York rap. Like eventually, niggas like Designer and them was like, oh, I'm gonna just start rapping like these niggas in the South and get over like that. Like people find a way around stuff. You know what I mean? Especially those of us that come of and from the so-called hip-hop era. You know what I mean? So another question was, why is, it's so important to understand, Moorish history and stuff like that. Like, think about this. Like 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't even see Moors on TV as Moors. You might see some white people in fezzes, like when Doctor Who did it, or a scene where you get like 227 where the women dressed up to get into the lodge and all of the Moors was in there with the feathers and all that. Like you might get some errant stuff like that, but think about that. Now it's like every other day you get some sort of information or some sort of thing about, Moorish culture, Moorish history, what's Moorish, what's not Moorish. You know what I'm saying? Going from prior to 2000, it's rare. You would see like you'd have like Moorish sightings. Like, yo, I saw a Moor today. You know what I mean? So think about that. So think about the jump in visibility. You know what I mean? So they're trying to jump ahead of it. So they get people like 50 Cent. They get these traders and these people who really have no civil liberty or civil understanding about their true nationality. And they do in the context of what it is in the ancient context, but in the sense of them trying to use it today to benefit everybody else, like what we talking about, they can't be involved in that because they have involved themselves knowingly with people and organizations that have the opposite agenda. Keep all of that, excuse me, secret, which is really not a secret. You know what I mean? Because so many people are awake to it now, in which now you seem like an expert on something that you've basically already been on. Now it becomes, well, what type of Moor are you? And that's when it becomes an individual thing. You see what I'm saying? Because that is the determination, I think, of how far you go or are willing to understand your birthright in the three facets that it represents itself, which is, land, air, water. You know what I mean? Which are basically the four elements. I mean, three elements, whatever. So you have this understanding, or we have this understanding of ourselves from the perspective of what we've been told. However, what we are or have been told is based upon us needing to understand that to help perpetuate the oppressive amnesia that we've all been suffering from the past how many hundreds, thousands of years. We'll really never really know. Even how we be building and we going in on it, we gotta understand that we're still going from the perspective of going against the opinion that what we are is not who we are. Understand? And there lies the rub in how we are then treated. But again, we're the only people on earth that they do this to. So it's then makes more sense or gives more credence to the whole Six Nation invasion, the Great War, so-called theory, that we are the remnants of. You know what I'm saying? We are the remnants of a great people who lost in the place that they already at, and who was so great that certain stipulations had to be made on how these people would be conquered. You understand? Justification has to be made on moving against somebody that you know is in the right. You understand? So us being the physical remnants of that is why we cannot be deported or taken anywhere or whatever they want to say, because of the fact that we are intrinsically tied to the land by the covenant that existed prior to the land in its present form existing. And the land in its present form only exists due to areas that were ceded to it, right, by members of our family who were a part of the so-called Moorish Wars. These Moorish Wars have been fed to us under various names. But in the end, it always goes back to who is in power at the collapse of everything. It was not no so-called American Indians the way that you or they describe them today. It was not them. Those people who you talk about, who they'll call the Dutch and these people, all of those people were a part of the greater, right, Moorish Empire, whether it was again Bled El Mezgin or Bled El Siba. So the brief intermission between 492 and let's say 1555, that was like the real beginning of the end of the internal struggle between us. And that is where everything to me started to lapse, because by 1555, by 1550, 1545, stuff like that, Moors was coming back up. People like Al-Mansur took over, became Sultan of America, and then initiated the one of the greatest campaigns, you know what I mean, in all the dominions almost simultaneously, leading to not only the subjugation of the Portuguese and these so-called nations that was doing whatever, but also the redistribution of their wealth back to dominions to help put Moors back in power based upon what happened in 1492. However, in between all of that, you get the exercise of the conversos, right? And these types of dudes that are now making deals with the infernal ones and trying to put money into the investment they made in the grafting and breeding program to help create these things, to again act as like what you see like an iRobot. That's basically what was up with them. You know what I'm saying? They were like the iRobot, the AI of the day. They were the modern version, and they were willing to go in there, you know what I mean, under the program, whatever religious program we gave them, and they were willing to go in there and shut people down and shut like the Blemleys down and the what you call it, the Cephalcephales, the dog-headed people. That they was willing to go in there and knock all of that down. You know what I'm saying? Because they was with these. They were a part of the same experiments. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't no thing for them. And then in reward, they was able to come up, be able to get more grafted into the society, or they were given, limited privateership. You know what I mean? Because they were given the name or the title, they were freed and accepted. You know what I mean? Into whatever house was sponsoring them or paid for them. You know what I'm saying? So eventually, these things, yeah, we're gonna get into that. I'm not sure the collab. If it wasn't him, it was some other ones as well that was under him. Because remember, there was like sultans all over the place. You know what I mean? Because it's a global state. It's really like a global state that was able to seamlessly integrate itself into the decaying states that were already there and then start building them up due to the mechanization that we already had over here after the reconsolidation between 1492 or 492 and 555 or 1555. You understand? So that's how it is relevant to us today, because we again are the remnants and the inheritors of that, which is why our names were so synonymous and precious to them and the state they trying to bring it into. See what I'm saying? Islam to the Moor that sent me the book. See how you got the red, white, and blue? But they in so-called Egypt over there. Right? Because it's universal. Chronicle the existence of the eminent historians by leading university colleges, well, disabled American veterans of World War II patriot Americanism. See? This is how they're able to push us into the future by doing the deeds, creating the public version, archiving the real historical aspect, and then giving us the fictitious version, the sanitized version that allows the timeline that we exist in to still function. You understand? Because we're all displaced peoples from displaced time periods that are coalescing with each other simultaneously, which is why each one of our perspectives is a collective perspective, but is individualized collectivism. That's what made America a good sell, because it was the idea that you could be a part of something but still have the independence to live your own life without an overarching imperialist government telling you what to do. But that was the premise that the original societists and all of that was coming from. These are more from the Pamunkey Nation when they had a navy. See, that's a navy's uniform. That's a sailor's uniform you got on. You understand? This red, white, and blue, the stars and the stripes, that's way older. That's going. We've got images of this going all the way back to so-called Egypt or Kemet or whatever you want to call it, Kamisha or Hikapatu or Hikupata, excuse me, or whatever. What it says is that wherever there was a people and they were able to extend the jurisdiction, then that people lived in both of those areas simultaneously. That's why you could have a Carthage in South Carolina, and you can have a Carthage over there in so-called Libya or Tripolitania. See? Because it's the people. So it's the same thing with the color scheme of the peoples and how they represent themselves. If they all red, white, and blue, or they all a certain thing, and they all have a certain understanding. Problem is, again, we don't go by what we see happening. We go by what they tell us is happening. So what we know can only be based on what we can show and prove. But what we can show and prove is only based on what we have access to in any given time period. You see? That's why they'll say, okay, we're going to declassify the Kennedy files by 2026. But they told us that way back in 1986. So now we done reached it, and it's like, so what? So you know what I mean? This is how they delay their punishment. You understand? Because, like I said, these Moors started tripping, and they started investing too much time and power into what was happening. So when they started getting found out, they had to create a boogeyman. They had to create a substitute for their disgrace, a scapegoat. So they created one, or use the one that had already been there over time and was used to perpetuate the illusion of who was really long term going to screw over the country. You know what I'm saying? I'm sorry about that, yo. So, okay, everybody following that, right? Let me get this on. So, what we have to understand is that everything they tell us about everybody historically basically is a lie. So, when we put stuff together, we got to go by the stuff that's already out there. Because remember, I told you, these niggas play a form of statecraft called decoy politics. And that's where they get a decoy, literally, and put them out there for you to think is the one, and it's really the other guy. So this way, when it hits the fan, we just keep blaming Whitey, 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 right? But on the low, Whitey is work. The nigga who's country dumb next to Whitey is the one that's really doing stuff. You know what I mean? So, for instance, how many people have ever met a white man named Washington in their life? I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm saying how many melanated people you know, or in your life, have you ever met a white man named Washington? Ever? Your whole life. Your whole life. Okay. Now, I did a joint. I got it on the app, and I'm going to have it soon on a Cold History of George Washington years ago. And I got into the fact that he grew up on one of the plantations he had was the Cameron Plantation, and another one was called the Martiau Plantation. The Martiau Plantation, let me get into this. The Martiau Plantation was regaled to a Moor named Nicolas Maritau. The Maritaus, or Brother Nicholas, Maritau, he was a part of the French Huguenot. The Huguenots were a part of the whole thing I was talking about with the Moors being pushed out and then reconsolidating themselves. Well, during that intermediate period, when a lot of these Moors was getting bagged up and thrown into slave camps, concentration camps, plantations, harems, whatever was happening to them, you know what I mean? You got a whole generation of these Moors that's broken down. This is the first generation of the nobles that's now really like in destitute state. So a lot of these dudes start consolidating themselves under pseudonyms. So that way, being Moors or being targeted, right? The Moors and the so-called Jews or the Hebrew Moors were being targeted, so they would reform themselves under different names like the Lombards or the Huguenots, or you know what I'm saying? This type of situation, or those types of demonstrations. So that's why a lot of Moors started being called different names, not just to get away from what was happening to them, but from what was happening universally to Moors in general. They was basically moving on them in a manner that wasn't conducive to them being able to practice their territorial rights that was guaranteed to them after the fall of Granada. That was one of the stipulations. That no more, nowhere that was a part of the empire, whatever, should be stripped of their titles and stuff. But once these Moors started converting and accepting the beast, this is when everything starts switching, because now they start flip-flopping. And now they start working with the same ones that's trying to box them out. You understand what I'm saying? And now they're going by these pseudonyms as if those are the real names. That's why you don't see Huguenots today. See what I'm saying? That was just another clan or tribe of Moors of the southern branch, or the Franciscan branch, by way, again, of the Granada territories that had been ceded to the Spanish crown. So Nicolas Maritau, he winds up coming to Charlotte, North Carolina, and goes to Charleston, and then from by way of Charleston, he shoot all the way up to Virginia. And in Virginia, the whole time he takes with him his two so-called Negro slaves, who, being that they were termed Negro, this means that they were indentured servants, but they was with him basically his whole life, right? And from that plantation, he hooked up with another family called the Camerons, and allegedly that's where your boy was born, your boy George. Now, when we get into the descriptions of George, well, first, this is Nicolas Maritau, or allegedly an image of him on your right. In the middle, on the left, is this book that you guys should get, because it basically confirms everything I'm talking about, and why all of a sudden, why the Renaissance was so important, and why museums like the Gamay exist, to be able to take so-called African or so-called melanated images of different ancient cultures and then redistribute them to white people. Just like the white lady that created the image of the first white people that was going to Egypt, because when they was first going there, they was only seeing us. So there was an old out-of-work artist lady from Europe who had got out there and realized she could make bread by painting pictures of these white people in Hellenistic form on these old mummies that they were just basically digging up and throwing in the street. And so they start doing this, and they start taking pictures, and she started painting portraits and all that. And then the white people, the Victorians, they start going crazy with it. Take it back to Europe, take it back to France. And then this is where the justification and all of this stuff about white people being in Europe and all this shit, white people coming from Egypt and all, this is where all this shit started. Look it up. All because, again, remember, these are people who, these Cabbage Patch people, they didn't come out of no real history from nowhere. You understand? All that's made up. So get this book, Rebels, Pretenders, and Imposters. It gets into exactly what I'm talking about, into the whole why decoys are used. On your left, and then on your right, that's Nicolas Maritau. That's George Washington's great-great-grandfather of the Martiau plantation. Martiau Cameron plantation. Now, Nicholas' family, he was also connected to the Anglo-Saxons, who were also melanated people. And in Anglo-Saxon, Washington is Hawasington. Hawasington, right? It almost sounds native, right? It almost sounds thing. Because I think Anglo-Saxon is just another BS joint for those clans that were part of the Guelph line of European dynasties. You had two lines. You had the Guelph, Guelph, the Guelphs, and then you had the Ibelines, right? The Ibelines, or the Ibiels, right? And of those two lines, that's so on one line you got the Saxons, to this, to that, and on the other line you got like the Lombards, the Venetians, to this, to that, right? But they all are part of the same line, who allegedly claim descent from those Hebrews who were not of the direct 12 tribes line. Because not all people who were considered of the ancient world who were Hebrews, not all of them were practicing Hebrews in that constructed way. So in this book, George Washington, right, that you see in the middle, the brothers was on Facebook going in on this. He brought me back to that old joint. Look, this how much this is how rad this nigga Maritau was. This is not the part I'm reading about Martiau is not about it's not in this George Washington biography. This is from something else. Let me just read it real quick. Coinage, Nicolas Maritau. Maritau, who was the personal representative of Henry V, the Henry V, Earl of Huntington, was naturalized in England before coming to Virginia. See, he served where? In the House of Burgesses, right? The Burgamores, the Burgermeisters. Because the House of Burgesses was, and he was appointed a justice and was a member of what? The Virginia Company. Who set up the Virginia Company? The Earls. Why were Earls chosen to do that? We'll get into that after I read this. Henry sent Martiau and another to Virginia at his own expense to protect his trade there and build fortifications where necessary. The Earl apparently obtained for Martiau this special form of naturalization granted only by proclamation. This gave him the right to acquire property and privilege to vote and hold office. You see what was going on back then? You see how much power you had back then? I thought we didn't have nothing. I thought we didn't have no money. I thought we was all slaves and all of this. This nigga right here, this turban Moor right here, was the representative of the King of England. Joined the House of Burgesses. He not even born. He not even from here. He not even from here. But he a part of the bloodline. You understand? He a part of the bloodline, so he get the privilege. Why? Because he could trace his ancestry back to those Moors who was displaced after Granada. And after that, everybody turned on the Spanish. Everybody turned on the Portuguese. And they started hammering them niggas from that point on up until the late 15, early 1600s. Then from the 1600s, they reestablished the tributary and vassal state system, and they all started paying us over here. And then we broke bread with the other Moors that were part of the other dominions that was over there. One of the biggest importers and dealers in that of us over there was the Moors of Monomatapa, which was basically African Tartary, like. And then they basically destroyed all of that, and then that, you know. So, yeah. So, this is what I'm saying. Right? Martiau was 33 when he arrived in Virginia. The sailing ship, the Francis Bonaventure, one of 153 passages. He selected places for palisades and fortifications of Yorktown at the Fort Story at the Old Point Comfort. Fort Monroe, one of the oldest forts in America. These are star forts now. We're not talking about We're not talking about sticks and wood like white people forts. We're talking about star forts. They talk about reestablishing the fortification. They talk about the star forts. The technology. In 1632, Martiau took his seat at the House of Burgesses as a representative from Yorktown in the Isle of Kent. Martiau plantation comprised of 1,300 acres, including the site of Yorktown. For his dwelling, he selected a high bluff on the curve of the York River. See? As it widens into Chesapeake Bay. This patent is in the land office in Richmond and contains his family's crest, right? So that's Martiau. Okay. Now we get into Washington, his great grandson. Here we go. This painting is from the Philadelphia Museum of Art. This is one of the Moors posted this in the thread we were building on this on. Big up to him. Excuse me. Okay. There we go. When Colonel was returning from the visit to General Shirley in Boston, Loudon consequently asked Kennedy for a description of the Virginian. Washington, said the captain, was a man about 6 feet high, of a black complexion, with black hair, which he then wore in a bag. Looks like a foreigner, a strong man. This again is one of the other images of so-called Washington. Now, when they said he's a dark-skinned man, about 6 feet tall, with a black complexion, black hair. Here you don't have black hair because they got him representing and wearing a wig. But look, he's standing next to all the technology. But what you should also look at is that this Washington is wearing a red coat. All of the images you've ever seen of George Washington, have you ever seen an image of George Washington in a red coat? Interesting, right? Especially if they're saying that George Washington, they said, was the one that chopped down the cherry tree, right? And we know the cherry tree represented the Moorish flag and all that, right? So if he had a black complexion and he was 6 feet tall, then who is this white man we looking at? Interesting, right? Then there's Charles Thompson. Charles Thompson was appointed by Continental Sheik of the original so-called Continental Congress, which again was comprised of also of people who are also of the like John Hanson was of the Swedish royal family, nobility. You already see this with the who appointed that. We're gonna get into the earls, who that is. Like, how many white people you ever seen named Earl? You ever met a white man named Earl? I think Earl would be more common. Charles Thompson said, "Let the world admire the supposed wisdom and valor of our great men. Perhaps they may adopt the qualities that they have been ascribed to them, and thus good may be done. I shall not undeceive future generations." See that? So what he basically saying is, let the world admire all of these niggas y'all call the founding fathers and all of that. But what was really going on was something totally different. Understand? These niggas was running a scam. And they got away with it. The Moors got away with it. Because they were dealing, because these Moors was dealing, like I said, with the infernal ones after the fall. A lot of them, when they started getting into the papal stuff, right? Once they got access back to their titles, that's when, by the time of Dracul, that's when they established the Societas Draconis. And that's when they basically codified their ability to practice the ancient ways, right, in secret while having state or diplomatic immunity. And almost like if they do a ritual in your town and then the police or somebody find out about it and it get blown up and they gotta, act like they locked them up. They doing that because they going with the script, but them people not gonna do no time. They're not gonna go to jail. They're gonna let them out because that's part of their diplomatic immunity rights, that they have the right to practice their religion. You understand? And so these dirty Moors, right, who started to work with, like, you had two branches. Like I said, you had the Ibelline and the Ulif, and then you had ones that was not with, that was all about suppressing the new peoples that was coming up, right? Due to how they were being procured and how they were being used against people in empire. Then you had the ones who was actually using these people and then trying to use them to, again, destroy the empire. Right? So when you see images like this, right? You're like, well, why are they with this white devil? Like, why are they bound to this white devil? Why is this Moor giving this crown? Why are these European Moors giving this crown to these demons? Because these demons right here, right, are part of the deal. They're sent by other Moors that's like them. And part of the ritual, part of the deal is you do the humiliation ritual to that which we created, then we go into recess as the what do you call it? We then act, we can now fall to the recess. We can go into the back, right? And do what we need to do and deal directly with the infernal ones, while everybody else is thinking that all of the arms and stuff is coming from these people when they were endowed to do that. The same way today, if you and I get into a beef, and then instead of me and you deal with it, you go and get the police on me, or I go get the police on you. It's the same thing. You understand? It's just at the time that this is happening, there's no state. This has just now become a proxy war thing. You understand? The envoys of the Antichrist preaching before the kings of Libya and Ethiopia. See, the king of the Moors submitting to the Antichrist in Bavaria. See, we see when it's happening. 1440 to 1450. See, this is what led to the fall. Is these ones, the ones that didn't want to continuously go against the other side of the family, that was still pushing all of the pagan ideology on everybody. They wanted it easy. They decided that they was going to basically go along with Yaku's grafted devil and then help them create a position over the rest of us. And we wasn't having it. And so that led to wars. That led to us sending expeditions out. And like I said, we were then called different names by different peoples. For instance, you know, these dudes, Vikings, right? Ancient and modern Britons. Nature knows no color line. J.A. Rogers was giving it up in the 20s. You know what I'm saying? They got us watching Thor and all this other type of stuff. And the Viking, they even got Europeans on that. And it's like, that's cool. Y'all get, you know what I mean? But in reality, according to that book, it says the invasion of the coast of the British Isles by the Vikings of a dark or black complexion on the historical evidence is too circumstantial to admit from doubt. The Irish annals of the Black Vikings were called the Dub Genti, or the Black Gentiles, also called the Danes, short for dinar or dinars, due to the money that they would carry with them. So do these niggas look like Thor to you? You know what I'm saying? So again, I'm not trying to dispel nobody myths. I'm just saying, according to the so-called data, historical evidence y'all say y'all love so much, it basically is saying that all of these were either so-called post-Hebrew or pre-Hebrew clans or melanated people who then split along those lines. Okay? Most, if not all, of the historic people in the Bible never existed in the conventional sense of we think of existence. You understand? We can only find remnants of situations based upon that. So, like, you may not find a actual like description or body or something of a certain thing, but then you might find something else from that time that verifies that. So it's hard to find like that place that we see as Jerusalem and all of that over there. Like, that's cool, but that's not really it. You know what I'm saying? Like, those again were colonies that was set up by people over here. That's why we had so much burn for so long, for so many centuries and millennia, because nobody could get over here like that. Like right now, go try to book a direct plane, a direct boat cruise to Africa. Go and do that right now and see what they tell you. You can't. You can only fly to Africa. Why? Why? Because they lying to you. If we had access to the Grand Canyon, we could probably walk. But, whatever. But a lot of the so-called Africans, with the decoy wars and stuff started, especially towards the end of the real, let's say, World War II, a lot of those Africans who were now deposed in Europe from the black nobility in them, they had to abdicate. So they fled to Africa and they blended in with those African peoples there. But through the Freemasonic connections, they were able to rise up into chiefhood there and then start to apply a lot of the European principles of control of populace into the traditional African systems, which is why a lot of the Africans is messed up today, because they don't even know this happened. Why would Idi Amin refer to himself as the last king of Scotland? Why would he have bagpipes? Why did he have his own tartan? Oh, he just made it up. Why did he have European people bowing to him? Why was he so hard on the Indians? Just because he was racist? Come on, man. This is a Norman. See, on the left is a Norman. On the right is a Senegalese Norman, which is where the Normans basically came from. There's a book you can get called 100,000 African Horsemen. And in that, it talks all about the Moorish equine horse culture and the magic culture we was having all throughout what they call Western Africa. So when they talk about the Western Hemisphere, understand they're talking about the western portion of Africa and everything west of that. So think about what I'm saying. When they say the Western Hemisphere, they're talking about Morocco, they're talking about West Africa, they're talking about all of West African on the edge of the Sahel and all that, all the way over here. Noir means black. The Noir men who came over with William of Orange and all of them, again, these is all melanated people fighting Moorish wars with each other. Same way we doing today. So why wouldn't we want to know the origins of where all this beef started? It's just back then people were more nationalistic. So this practice of putting the slave at the top and then ruling from behind the scenes, this is when all of this stuff started. And so other nations wanted to top each other. And then they started just creating their own situations for how people was going to be like that. So the reason why you see all of these American depictions of Moors in Bavaria and all over Europe and Asia, all that, because those were our people, and they were depicting us over here, setting up all of the stuff over there after what happened. And then somewhere, like I said, around the late 16 to 1700s, when that Illuminati shit and all that shit started, that's when everybody started bugging. Because that was the era of the Freemasonry thing, where everybody was a part of a different order. Because now they started realize that they could start using Moorish magic as a means to fortify power for their lodges. But they had suppressed Moors for so long, real Moors who understood it, right? This is where the dirty Moors start coming from. So then you get a bunch of different people who then start trying to take advantage of that. And this is also an origin of where a lot of the mesmerism culture and the so-called black mesmerism cultures started coming from, started rising up around that time. Look. All the European Knights, all of that stuff, that was just a division of those Moors in Europe. It's not, the white people was not running it like they wasn't like that. They weren't unified. They didn't have a structure. Where was they getting cotton? These people didn't even bathe. So when they talk to you about the Europeans that wasn't bathing and all that, they talking about them that lived in the hovels and the holes and the caves and shit in the ground, who were running from these types of people, who was bagging them up for experiments and God knows what else. Shaving them down, putting the females in the harems, putting the males as galley slaves. Then you had other ones that would take pity on them and bring them into the family and raise them up, give them a name, give them a coat of arms. That's what the movie Last Night was about with Morgan Freeman and Clive Owen. The Welsh Chronicles, for example, make no such clear distinction about coming away of England by the Norwegians, by pretty well were all black. So all the Norwegians was black. So the Netherlands, the Dutch, they telling you right here, all of them are black. So that means that they was black back then, Norwegians, and all of that, right? That means that them same Dutch Norwegians was the same Dutch Norwegian Netherland people that was over here in Manhattan that was working with the traditional Tassalagi in them to set up the Dutch Confederacy, the Dutch Empire, which again was the language of commerce, just like Latin was. The Welsh Chronicles and the Black Gentiles. See, the Moors that was not technically Hebrews, the Black Host, the pagans, the devils, and the likes, you see, mentions both the Danes and the Norwegians, you see, because these niggas was all the ones that got down with the old rights, the draconian rights, because they was down with the Drakenberg shit, the whole Societas Draconis. Okay? So Welsh, Cornish, right? All of these are melanated people in the ancient past. William Wallace and all of them people is melanated people. They just give us Caucasian people due to the ritual, to always make us seem like we not who we are. Remember the movie Skeleton Key? How the black slaves was really the people who was really the progenitors of the family? And right when they was going to kill them, they're going to sacrifice them, what did they do? They jumped out of their body, went into the bodies of the little white kids, right? So when they lynched the little white kids, when they lynched their black bodies, they killed the white kids who was in the black bodies, right? Because they learned how the body jump. Where they learn that at? Egypt, Salamanca, Toledo, right? Hmm. 1 second. So yeah, that's how they was doing it, you know. So again, if Washington was so-called white or Caucasian, that says a lot. I mean, melanated, which we already know, then that means Lincoln. That means all of them niggas was really. So all of the images that we've seen of these people, these alleged people who allegedly are these people, whatever, all of them is fake. They gotta be, because they not gonna lie about him and then tell the truth about the other one. They're gonna do the opposite. They're gonna lie about the whole thing. They're gonna make you think everybody was what they say they was, but they wasn't. Right? So we were talking about the Virginia Company, right? Yes, the Virginia Company came out of the Barbary Company. It's one of the subsidiaries of the Barbary Company, which was also the Plymouth. Well, first, the Barbary Company, right? The Morocco Company or the Barbary Company was the trading company established by the Sultan of Morocco and Queen Elizabeth. Okay? This is why you have title to all of these places and they don't want you to have a state, a real identity, because it messes up the narrative of who gets to keep your money. Barbary Company, Morocco Company, or Barbary Company was a trading company established by the Sultan of Morocco when in 1585. See, after what happened with Granada, said we was never going to go through that again. So we reconsolidated. These wars of that time reconsolidated the empire, mechanized it, industrialized it, right? And needed to take control of all of those lands that were still under the jurisdiction of these so-called pagan Christians that, again, were also melanated, but were using Mamelukes and all of these other things to try to gain power over the traditional people. Okay? Queen Elizabeth, boom, granted the patent to who? The Earls of Warwick, Leicester, which is Lancaster, as well as 40 other earls who were all Moors of the Moroccan Empire. So the term Earl, right? Lord, Earl, Baron, Duke, right? All of that, right, is Moorish English. Because technically she is a Christian. So this is showing you a unification, right, between the so-called Christians, right, of the day and the Moors against the other so-called Christians and other so-called Moors. You see? The Moor, who is the officer of the Isle of Man, who summons the courts for the several sheddings. What is a shedding? A rioting, a tithing, or a division in the Isle of Man, right? That's where we would get the slaves, where the whole island is divided into what? 6 sheddings, 6 for the 6 nations, in each of which there is a coroner or chief constable appointed by a delivery of a rod at the Tynewald Court or the annual convention for the king at where the Isle of Man, which was the island where we would summon all of these European powers to receive our sheddings, our money. This is where they would pay us at. And if they didn't have, when they didn't have money, they would put up their men, or the men would put up their women. Right? What is the hundreds? As it says, the Moors are the ones who summon the court, right, of the hundreds, the bailiff of the hundred. What is 100? The 100 Gemot. Among the Saxons, a meeting court, or a meeting court of the freeholders of 100, meaning it is the court for the corporate officers, the free officers of the whatever company or corporation, which which assess times a year, possess times a year, and possess the civil, criminal jurisdiction and ecclesiastical powers. The Moors. That's why we couldn't be put into jail and all of that in English jurisdictions and all of that, because the Queen was basically in amity with the Sultan, basically his wife. The hundreds. Under the Saxon organization of England, each county or shire is comprised of indefinite number of hundreds, each hundred containing the 10th tithe or groups to the 10 families of the freeholders or the frank pledges. See? So when they talk about tithing in church, all of that came from them paying us. That's money that they paid to their gods, who was you. That 10% that came out went to you and your family, because you were freeholders, meaning that you didn't even have to have any real paperwork to say you was a part of this. You just had to be a part of the bloodline and could prove association to it. But its most remarkable feature was the corporate responsibility of the whole for the crimes or default of the individual members. The introduction of this plan of organization into England is commonly ascribed to Alfred. So all the earls were Moors, all the barons was Moors, all of the the lords and all of that was Moors. Which is why we saw that image of Washington in the red coat. They were all tributary states. And we, again, are the beneficiaries of the outcome of all of those pledges. Where do you think all of this money that America has to just give to everybody in the world come from? Why do you think they wanna try to, the African Union is trying to inject themselves and make so-called African America or African Americans as a sixth district in their union structure. So that way, if and when they cut the reparation checks, they get the checks, and then the white men give them the checks, and then they supposedly, allegedly give the checks then to us. With what government agency, what annals have been set up to even propose that to any so-called black, so-called Americans or Moors in America? What structure is even established for y'all to be able to even have the gall or audacity to even try to attempt something like that? But they feel they could do it because the African Union just nominated Spike Lee as its ambassador to Black America. So, of course, again, I told you they use the boule niggas to sell you out every time. That's who they're going to use to try to use with the transition into this. It's not going to work. Let me see. So yeah, here's another one with Washington real quick. Search by Colonel Martiau was a no perfect going of his military position. Ludon, another Moor probably, and then Van Horn, that's another Moor. Pierre Fidel. Pierre Fidel is the white. Brother Ali was saying that Pierre Fidel is probably the white man that we see in the pictures with the real Washington. That's probably the decoy nigga. That's probably his name. Pierre Fidel, on the basis of Van Horn's description, added to what the traitor had said casually in his letter of himself and his military position. The traitor being Washington. What tall, dark officer was there in America, 38 years of age, unmarried, who had an aide de camp and was going to participate in the expedition against Fort Duquesne? The only officer who was known to Lord Loudoun's informants in any way as answering this description was Colonel Washington. He was single, he had an aide, and he was to start in the next march to Ohio, as it is chanced that Lord Loudoun had a close hand, right? So this again is what I'm saying about them or us creating the atmosphere to use these people and move them around as chess pieces against one another. So we really don't know who them white people is. I think they were a bunch of castrados who had been freed and accepted, and they had fought for their freedom, and they agreed or allowed themselves to be used as the image base of what they were going to create the country to eventually try to look like. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I think they were basically castrados. I did a tape on that a long time ago, where they were basically those types of white people. When you see them in the pants and all of that, those was the Freemasonic castrados that they was. But they was valiant. They was fighting. You know what I mean? For these dirty Moors to do what they needed them to do. So it worked out for them. At least for a little while. But the real Washington, the real Lincoln, the real Adams, all of them real niggas, they was not. They didn't have to say what they were. Just like the whole Benjamin Franklin hoax, like that was actually a real person. When that was really just them trying to bury Emmanuel Ben Muali, aka Benjamin Bey, and ascribing all of his stuff to Banneker. Franklin. It's another thing about Washington. Okay, this comes from the old publication at the time they came out with called The American Muslim. So we already know his grandfather was a Huguenot Moor, right? So that means who traced his lineage back to Granada, right? The American Muslim should not be a stranger to American soil. In our humble opinion, he has been here for a long time. In fact, since the nation was born. It is not claiming to say that the president cited at birth, George Washington was a Muslim, unlike the other kindred spirits of the American Revolution, which explains why Thomas Jefferson has one of the oldest Qurans in the American continent. Right? The same Thomas Jefferson that allegedly held Sally Hemings and the rest of these people in bondage. When at the same time now, if we take the perspective of him actually being a mulatto, right, or at least a brown-skinned to melanated man, and then Sally Hemings and them being the POW slaves that they had imported from the Barbary Wars, it makes sense why he treated them different. You see? But in order to give credence to the people who would be the stewards of the country, they got to make sure that the image of the saviors of the country were now these new people. That's why the first movie that they all watched at the ISIS theaters, right? The Freemasonic ISIS theaters was The Birth of a Nation. which showed them going and fighting Moors. Like, go, if you look at some of the shots in Birth of a Nation, there's one shot where they get a white man. All the people in the movie was white, especially the painted people, the melanated people. But some of the people had feathers on, taking their feathers off and hanging them, simulating hanging them. This right here. Yeah. Your encouragement with your majesty has been pleased generously to give to our commerce with your dominions and punctuality that you have caused the treaty with us to be observed. See that? He's referring to him as your majesty. That means, again, he is subordinate to the sultan. They just changed their government, meaning that they took the brutish side of the government from main view and left the Republican side / Moorish side in effect in terms of asset base, equity, right? Substance, res, material. The eagle side was now going to be populated by the union between the northern and the southern Freemasonic jurisdictions that were now going to identify themselves under the two things, because they were always feuding all the way back in Europe. Remember, I told you the Guelph and the Ibelline. Well, in America, the Ibelline would be the Republicans. The Guelph would be the Democrats. You understand? The Ibelline would be the Bloods. The what you call it? You see what I'm saying? The other one would be the Crips. It's the same people warring. They just forgot the causes and where it came from. See, your Imperial Majesty has been so kind as to write in favor of the United States to the Bashaws of Tunis and Tripoli. And I present to you the sincere acknowledgement and thanks to the United States for this important mark for your friendship for them. That's why they can never break any agreement really with Moors. That's why they can't do but over so much to them, because if they do that, it's over for them. The Kingdom of Morocco has nothing to do with the original statutes and stuff in which the prophet was revested with. They have no contingency value of that, because through the Treaty of Marseille and all that, they took themselves out of that part of it in order to go through an occupational period with the French in which they could have what they have today, excluding us. Not denying us per se, but not necessarily also endorsing us until we can see or prove that we're politically viable to do that for ourselves. Everybody talking about what the temple can't do and what the prophet can't do and what a Moorish American can't do. And only people saying that is other melanated people, is other Moors. Ain't nobody else listening to that in real life. They could try to do as many BMFs as they want. It's not going to destroy the prophet legacy. 50 Cent can't destroy that. These niggas can't. They all cursed now. Think about that. They all cursed. Everybody involved in that is cursed. You understand? Not because I cursed them, because they're cursed. Because you did that in front of the prophet and think you could just, you just acting. That's what you think? Okay, watch. Watch. Everybody involved in that. Right? It's already starting. Look what happened with Meech. Look what happened with 50 the other day with the Rick Roll. It's already happening. They already catching it. It's only going to get worse for them now. Until they repent. You're going to have to give something to the temple. You're going to have to do something. Remember they said that the fascists, right? They said, you always hear this term fascist. This person's fascist. Well, the fasce, right? The symbol of the fasce, right? They said it came from Rome, right? Don't they say that? It's one of the oldest so-called images of emblems of America, right? What's that right there? What that Moor got on his back? And he a king. What's that on his back? Ain't that the fashion right there? Yeah. Yeah. In their own land. These ain't no white people. Where was Siberian Indians getting pearls from? Where was they getting pearls from? Where was they getting ostrich feathers from? Where was they getting silk? Where was they getting silk and cotton robes from? All them niggas wore buffalo hides and shit like that. Like, and then over here, when you see all of these images, like I said, in Bavaria, Germany, that's because your people from over here went over there. And vice versa. Just like they tricked all the people in the Caribbean, make them think they all came from Africa due to the transatlantic slave trade. When in reality, due to the expulsions of what I was telling you about, in which the huge portions of the Huguenot population from southern France had to go, huge populations from Ireland, Scotland, all of them came to the Caribbean, to the Antilles, excuse me. And once they was in the Antilles, right, they stayed there. Then they started to flood the places they came from with the people coming out, the caves and all that. And then gave them limited jurisdiction because the dirty earls and the dirty dukes and the rest of the Moors was over there doing their thing and making way for them now to take position. Then after the so-called slave trade thing goes down, they shut that down. Then they say, oh, y'all could come back. But now that y'all coming back with the fake history that they gave y'all to say that all y'all was brought over here from Africa. When, like I said, find me a boat that goes directly from Jamaica to Africa. Find me a boat that do that. Find me a cruise ship that goes directly from America to Africa across the Atlantic Ocean. Show me that. It's a scam. They just be scamming. And the more they want us to conform to the identity that they have locked us in for, the more you know it's a scam. If they lied to us about Washington, well, come on, man. He on the money. So that's not even him on the money. That might be Pierre Fidel. Whoever this nigga is. But we know it ain't the person that they showed us. So again, if Washington wasn't wasn't white, then that means none of them was. They're not going to pick and choose. The Welsh, the Danes, all these people's is Moors. The so-called Thessaloniki, the so-called Ojibwe. Or no matter what continent we go to and we see these people, they the same. They the same, Moors. It's the same story. Somebody come taking their identity and making them think that they something else. See, these the Moors. So when you see the Illuminati and they be in the hoods and all of that, oh, it's the white people, the Illuminati, and they're gonna sacrifice us and all this other type of, like, all of that, all of these niggas, it's all a scam. It's all them trying to replay and re-image themselves as what we were, what we did to them. But there wasn't enough time. You understand? They didn't have enough time to really be this or be that. So what do? They gotta flip time. They gotta turn time into something else. They gotta alter it. See? They gotta give themselves more time, while at the same time reducing the time that we think that we have. Why do you think they always tell you the world about to end every year? Since you've been alive. Since you've been alive, they've been telling you the world gonna end. Nuclear bombs gonna drop. Right? And I'm not saying I want them to. What I'm saying is, it's a scam. It's another fear tactic. If you're gonna do it, do it. There's nothing. If they're gonna do it, there's nothing you're gonna be able to do to stop them from doing it, right? And they allegedly did it already in Japan, right? Right? They dropped all these nukes on Japan, but yet and still, you can go to Japan now in the same place they dropped them nukes at, and you don't get no radiation poisoning. So what's that about? How does that work? Russia, I just saw some shit. Russia, they pointing the nuclear bombs at Washington and all that. He not even in Washington. They don't. That's a movie set. That's not even real. That shit is on Zillow for sale. So what, they gonna bomb an empty building? That's what y'all saying? What I'm saying, brothers and sisters, is that all of this Illuminati, all of this stuff that they've been doing with all of these hundreds and thousands of years with this stuff, they learned from our own people. And this was tricks that our own people used against us. Right? So it killed me when I see people like, oh yeah, the Moors was dirty and the Moors let the white people do this. Yeah, there were Moors that did that. And there was a lot of Moors that went and killed those guys for doing that. And that led to hundreds and thousands of years of blood feuds and blood wars. You know that, right? That's why we're fighting now. So maybe we need to find another way to deal with this. You understand? Because trying to wipe these niggas, all these niggas out at once is not the ticket. It's not getting it. They always want to say again what they aren't, what they are, right? So, like I was saying with Musa and Jeremiah and Nehemiah and all these things, these weren't necessarily people the way that we understand people to be. These are things that were compiled over hundreds of years that we had to ascribe an understanding to, that allowed us to pass down these stories. That essentially, that's why all stories are essentially the same story. Evil always loses in the end. No matter what's happening with evil right now, it's always going to lose in the end. Right? So what they do now is and the man is the hero of the family, and he's there to protect and all that the family. So what they do, they create it now where now the female is the one who saves the family. Which then throws off the balance between the male and the child. See? Which then helps them control the family, because the woman has supplanted the family, has given up the family for convenience, has given up the family for the state. The state is the man. Right? And because the state is immaterial, it don't need children. It just needs children to make money for it. And if she can be a vehicle which she is sustainable for it, then it's a win-win for everybody, right? But like I said, not everybody was Hebrews. Not everybody was Egyptians. Not everybody was this. However, those of us born on this hemisphere, right, for successive generations, right, even if there was an admixture within a generation or two, it's not going to change the overall aspect. Because guess what? After about 20 generations, let's say 10 to 20 generations, any trace of you and I, direct lineage or direct DNA in them, is latent at best. You understand? That's why they say that there comes a day where you actually fade from everybody's memory, and the last person on earth that says your name, or thinks about you, that's the last time that you exist in this realm. That's why these people do everything to keep their names in this realm, y'all. Why do you think they go to so great lengths to stay relevant and stay around? Because they have no life after this. It's over for them. So the so-called, like I said, when you see the Illuminati and they be in the red robes and all of that, like all of that was, where do you think they get this from? People couldn't read and write. Yes, more definitely. Lenny said most of the West African slaves, i.e. Portuguese converted Christians, were stationed off the coast of West Africa, got transferred here. Yes, and their ancestors, their peoples, were those imported African slaves that was mentioned, distinct from the slaves and the Negro slaves. 3 different classes of slave, of enslaved person. Right? So we go from this. So how you ask yourself, how these niggas go from this now, right? Because this is them basically grafting them out the cave or whatever, right? So how they go from this to this? You did? How did that happen? Why would they do that? You see in real time where they come from. You think they didn't know that these niggas is coming from goats and was basically not even human and all that, and now they submitting to this thing? Why would they do that? To help get control over you. To create a perpetual humiliation ritual by which they could bond themselves with this fake thing that they created to help put the rest of us in line that was against its creation in the first place. You dig what I'm saying? These niggas was dirty. It don't mean it don't matter that they was Moors. The Antichrist that they're submitting to, right, is the avaricious part of they self that they help manifest this homunculus to help inflict it on the rest of us. Does that mean all Moors was doing that? No. Why you think it ain't? Why you think it got shut down to such a degree historically? Who was doing that? It wasn't the American Indians. It wasn't the, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't them. It wasn't the what you call it. It wasn't the Zulus or these. Them niggas was fighting. At least the ones over there in South Africa, because they were the first ones to displace the Khoisan, who was there before everybody, and they more related to us because they Asiatic. Ain't nobody talking about that though. Then they labeled them color. Same way they did the so-called American Indian, i.e. the Moors over here, labeled them color because they had an ancient DNA nationality that tied them to the land. No, these dudes, these African peoples, from these states, especially the ones that turn Christian, they're the ones that found with them to make that happen. They turn they kingdom to Christian kingdoms and stuff to get money with Lucifer and the rest of the oath takers and the small hats and them. No matter that they was melanated or not. It just means that this is what they did. And then they created separate secret societies that they could further train these things throughout history to be able to keep the rest of us locked down. So we always think it's always a white man running shit and the nigga is always playing the step and fetch it, right? But think about it. Wouldn't that be the perfect play? Well, ain't that the perfect play? That's Kaiser Sose walking straight at the end. You don't look at the one. Like they said, if a black man want to rob any place in the world, all he got to do is dress up like a janitor, go into any building, and they don't even look at him. Think about the power that has. That's called the power of invisibility, the power of anonymity. Think how many so-called black serial killers done got away because they done just profile it that only so-called white men is out here killing women. Think about it. These stereotypes help them murder and kill us. And we perpetuate them because we caught up in what color this nigga was. I don't give a damn what color the criminal is. I don't give a damn what color the serial killer is. You understand? I don't care. Now, would one have more preponderance to do something than the other? Definitely. See this? This is allegedly was a picture of Weishaupt and them, all the castrados together at the first order of the so-called Illuminatis. Right? But this ain't them. This ain't the real Congress. The real Congress was held in Switzerland with John Hanson presiding over it. And that's when they made the deal. The split between the order of death and the order of evils. So we're supposed to believe that all of these people in here are in this place and this is their place. And this lodge and everything was theirs and this is how they... No. This was donated to them None of these niggas own no property. None of these niggas had names. These are all castrato slaves who were raised up because they came through the program. That's what you're witnessing here. Half these niggas didn't probably even have penises. You understand what I'm saying? These are eunuchs. These niggas didn't, but they had valor, and they were useful to these dirty Moors who was willing to give up their inheritance to put these people in power for a season, what they call a little season, to eventually then wrestle the power back from them. And so long as we didn't get it, see the Hebrew star in the sun. They showing you. See the rainbow going to America. This is America right here in the painting. See Mercury? Yeah. So we're always supposed to believe that, oh yeah, this is the white people. This was how they run. See how they walking on the map of the world? But they're literally walking across the whole world in the map. They showing you how it's flat. You see any globes in here? No. No. You see how he's walking? This right here, again, America. He's walking across the map. Over here is Europe. They literally standing on America, and they all got the swords. Yes, because they're going. This is the graduation class, the first class that was now going to go out and perpetuate the lie that we have now all accepted as the damn truth. That's why they tell you that there's a conspiracy that Adam Weishaupt was really George Washington. No. The real conspiracy is George Washington was a Moor. All of them was Moors, not just the Continental Congress, all these niggas. Charles Thompson, again, was appointed to the Continental Congress by somebody who was not basically a part of the Congress. He was a Moor with his own title, a so-called chief with his own title. How you do that? The same way his great-grandfather, Nicolas Maritau, could come over here on behalf of Henry with basically no papers and get put up in the House of Burgesses. Yes, more indeed. Lenny, the swords. The swords represent the secret words. He's absolutely right. So, again, it's a scam. So, barbarian is Berberin. See what I'm saying? Berber is Bourbon, right? Bourbon and Lombard. All of those are tribes that were over there and came back over here because of their ancestral ties to us. And because they were all merchants, they created pathways for them to make money together through these so-called hundreds. The hundreds were now under the Christian jurisdiction due to the usurpation of the Grand War that happened between the Moors, that basically started again from the fall of the so-called Temple of Jerusalem, which represented the temple of the old man, right? The old Moors, the old broken Moors, right? Or the old Moors of the old pagan periods, against the new Moors, who were representing themselves as the Arianus Afris Empire, aka the Arians, who were against the Constantine version of Christianity and reconsolidated themselves again as the Grand Moorish Empire, who then went to war with these niggas, which was the continuation of the war that they had been fighting against them since Carthage, right? Another thing, Geronimo was another Moor, right? But peep this. Moore sent me this. Big up to him. Big up to everybody that sends me stuff that helps me with this. Geronimo's father was Gabriel Bonaparte, dead by 1589, mercenary horseman for the Republic of Genoa in Ajaccio. His mother was Francisco Montano from the patrician family. Gabriel's father was Francisco Bonaparte, who died in 1540, nicknamed Il Morto, just like what's his name was named Il Morto, Alessandro of the Medici family. Big up to the Duchess of York. that Francisco was a nobleman from Sarzana in Liguria who had served as mercenary crossbow horseman in the army of St. George Bank in St. Giorgio. He had been assigned to Corsica, in 1490, and had married the following year, Miss Katrina Castellateo, right? The daughter of Guido Day, she married a Day, Castelletto, and the local representative of the St. George Bank in Francesco, who had retired in the 1510s, decided to settle permanently on the island of Beauty in Corsica, right? Thus founding the Corsican lineage of the Bonapartes. So Geronimo could not have been a dirty, disgusting looking Siberian who they always show you in these pictures, because he actually came from a noble French Moorish bloodline. His great grandfather, again, was a Moor. So again, I'm showing you, if Alexander Dumas was real and he said he fought with Napoleon, and Napoleon was real, because some people say he's not real, but we've already disputed, showed and proved images and pictures of him from the time period. He was melanated. That means Toussaint was melanated. That means all of these people that we talk about historically is melanated, and we got to stop putting white faces on them and picking and choosing which ones we're going to acknowledge. This one was posted by Brother Bomdre Rockwell, or Sir Bomdre Rockwell on Facebook. He posted this. While full-fledged articulations of racial difference did not exist until the late 17th century, let me reduce it a little. 17th century, there were taxonomies in place for classical antiquity that qualified the people. The people are naturally subordinate to qualities of their country's birth, wrote the Greek astrologer and mathematician Ptolemy, right? We're going to get into Ptolemy next week, because Ptolemy they don't ever talk to you about that, because that's directly related to you in the Moorish Empire. One should not call and say the Ethiopian white or straight-haired, and the German or Gaul black-skinned, woolly-haired, or the Greek savage soul or untortured mind. See that? So Germany, black. Gaul, which is all France, all of the Franconian Empire people speaking, melanated. So that's it, moguls. Like, I don't know what else these niggas be trying to really convince us, because in the end, we've already shown and proved that this whole thing is basically one big family feud. And unfortunately, we caught in the middle of it. You know? So, anybody got any other questions? Yeah, so them robes that the Illuminati them niggas was wearing, that's all the robes that they was wearing when they intoned and created them in them dirty rituals or whatever they was doing to bring them into existence. So that's why they got to dress up in them shits. Because a writer can only write up to his own intelligence. So they can only create things up to their own intelligence, which is why they have to deal with outside or infernal intelligences to give them guidance that they can no longer get from us. Islam. So yeah, so the real Illuminati is your lower self. The real, like, there's these orders and these people out here doing these horrible things, but essentially it doesn't matter. It's what we understand allows us to rise above what we don't. You know what I mean? Anybody have any questions before we close out? I was gonna get into this other stuff, but I don't think we got enough time. yeah, so when you see these Moors and they was giving up and doing these rituals and bowing to these niggas and getting baptized, that's all it was about. That was their humiliation rituals. That was part of their pledge to the lower ones, that they was now gonna follow through and be what, you know, they needed to be in order to keep control. God damn it. So keep doing that. 1 second, y'all. Okay. But yeah, everything they do is ritualistically imitating us. You know what I'm saying? No matter how good or how bad it is. So once we get on our own team, then we can start taking control of the situation that they keep trying to put us in. But there's a reason why all of this was happening in secret. Get the secret teaching of the ages. Get the secrets of the brotherhood of the secret mysteries of the brotherhood of the East. Get a book called The Divine Pymander. Any books by Randolph. All of that is old Moorish science, old Moorish magical science. They just rebranded it in the new era and put it under Blavatsky and Crowley and all that stuff, and then mixed it with a bunch of other satanic crap that's really garbage. But this is what you're dealing with. This is the union. This is the white boy working together. However, just because those Moors is dirty, that does not count for all of us. Because if we was all like that, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. Like I said, there's a reason why these niggas is underground. There's a reason why they do all this stuff in secret. Because there's something in you, in us, that will come online seeing this type of stuff for real. And now they really got to be about it. Now you really got to be on what you say you want. Because now what's in you is revealed, but now what's in me is going to come online to deal with that. And you've been trying to suppress that too long for me now to reactivate it and then turn into a flying saucer or some shit on your ass. And then now you're done. They can't handle a mass awakening. They got to piecemeal it. So if they could get Moors, like I said, to bow and kowtow and buy them off, because like I said, a lot of these Moors are descended from these people, from these Moors who made these deals. You understand? And they don't even know until they actually get involved, become Moors, and then they see that, oh, I am the dirty Moor. Yes, you are. You know what I'm saying? So we done shown and proved all of the European clans and tribes basically was all melanated. And what made them Moors was their connection to the blood right titles and heirs that were already from over here. That's really what allowed you to be seen as part of the Moorish Empire or a part of the Aboriginal white race, according to what Meredith Quinn talked about in Time Walker. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah, so slave ships that these Africans and these people was trying to, convince you came from and all of that. More cap. You know what I'm saying? More cap. More propaganda. More using imagery to simulate control based on stories and mind triggering events that really had nothing to do with reality. And overall manipulation of people's prefrontal cortex and nervous system by basically converting the nervous system into a slave, or in this case, a slave ship. Sorry. You know what I'm saying? So this is the slave ship that you need to get across the transatlantic. You know what I mean? Anybody else have any questions? Well, again, thank you guys for coming through. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for any donations you guys can send to Cash App, # capital D S418. I definitely appreciate it. Those donations help me strive to upgrade the system and, you know, keep it going without having to deal with the wrong people to get it done. You know what I mean? So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the ADOT app. If you have already and your subscription is up and you can do it, if you can resubscribe, definitely appreciate it. If you haven't also checked out Cordoba Organic, www.cordobaorganics.com. It's definitely out there for you to check out for all your skincare needs. We Moorish Americans need to have products that are free of all the poisons that they purpose into us. So I definitely give honors to my queen for almost 20 years of providing this relatively immediate and needed service to the people. You know what I mean? So I definitely want to give honors to her for that, and everybody that's been supporting over the years. I appreciate it. Also, if you haven't already, check out www.aseer.com. And if you haven't already, you can also pick up your copy of the Dark Scroll 418, the world's most dangerous comic book novel, with some more joints to come, inshallah. So if anybody else have any other questions, you just let me know. You can hit me up at houseofl@hotmail.com anytime. And like I said, any donations, anything like that, definitely be appreciated. You could also do so to PayPal to Morally Correct Mediums. That's MOORALLY Correct Mediums. All right. So again, thank you guys for the support. I really appreciate it. If you guys have any other questions about anything, just hit me up again at houseofl@hotmail.com. Really appreciate you, inshallah. It's been another great day building with you in the apocalypse. And please subscribe to the YouTube joint, man. They starting to put the throttle on the page again. So if you can get subscribed and get others to subscribe, I greatly appreciate it. All right? Peace.